Someone has been there for a She was just. Well, would you like our attention?
Yeah, going live.
On YouTube.
We're going live.
Okay, we're all ready.
Well, I'm just thinking what Bobby said, just to prevent any accidental slips on.
Gary, how are you sitting down there?
I got bombarded before I got this, so. I'm not sure. Processing stuff. I'm with you.
I mean, in the 40 minutes I didn't see her, you
Yeah.
were bombarded.
Yeah, easily.
I'm glad I went home.
I'll just see.
Some more coming. Shall we get started?
We're back.
I have so much stuff.
We've got more paperwork coming in, but to call it part of my wellness program. Do you want to talk about Big first? Then we can do the rest of it? Okay.
All right, good evening, everyone. We'll open June 6th budget meeting, budget workshop, and all counselors are present. And so today we are kind of wrapping it all together. Sophie's got a few things for us to.
I don't know if Avi is still in the back. I know that I think you can hear me, but I can't hear you. So, hey Avi,
My mic's working.
I can't hear council.
Do I need to get closer?
Your mic's not working?
Hello. Mine is.
Cheryl's is. It's just-
Test, hello?
Hello.
all right, I
I
think,
guess I have to swallow the mic.
I don't know if you've got the broken mic, maybe? You get that?
It's not the mic, it's Cindy.
It's me, I'm broken.
Okay, well,
Hello? Is that better?
yes. I can hear
Hello?
you. Yes.
Okay, I'll put it right in my face. How's that? Is that better? Yes. Yes. Okay. Now I'm going to turn it to you, Sophie, and turn off my mic, okay?
That sounds like a plan. We have a nice list of things to work through today, and I've got a packet coming for you in just a few minutes where Lori was able to join us for a few minutes. I wanted to.
I'm here for the evening.
Oh, okay.
My
Okay.
children should be at baccalaureate, but they have a job at the Penobscot Theater, and so they're at work tonight.
Oh, okay. Can we get each council one of these? Okay. So if we're going to take things in the regular order.
Yep.
You're getting a packet of information. I'd like to start with page 1 of the small packet.
Don't have that.
Give that to them yet, or am I giving that to them?
You're giving them everything.
Okay.
And just wanted to take a minute to review with you some changes that have happened in the draft budget since we last met and where the current draft budget stands. Rob Yerxa and I are here tonight to talk to you about an issue that has come up in FY19 that we think we have a solution for, but if you don't agree with our solution, which ultimately you would have to agree with it, it's a council decision, we would need to make some pretty significant changes to the capital plan. So we just want to review that with you quickly to make sure that we're on target with the capital plan. No reading ahead, folks. So, since the original budget was printed, we have made 14 changes to it. And those changes totaled $74,101 and $101.32 decrease in the net commitment, the net municipal assessment. There we go. So I just want to review. We had been through several of them through the last time we met last week. However, we made a $10,000 increase in revenue as the result of a proposed fee change, a complete change in structure of how we assess and collect fees for the landfill use. We also found a savings of $2,200 in the assessing expense budget because there's money in the budget this year to pay for the fireproof safe that they are required to have, fireproof filing cabinet that they're required to have.
So we're buying that this year.
We're buying it in 19, and since we're buying it in 19, we don't need to assess taxpayers in 20.
Great.
So we started, you had asked me in the last meeting to look at revenue sharing projections. I went through and created the formula, and everything looked great, but I couldn't get the number to tie for 2.5%, which is the governor's current proposal. So I contacted MMA to find out what I was doing wrong in the formula. And lo and behold, the March 12th projections that were provided by MMA were incorrect. So we picked up an additional $38,973 in revenue sharing from the switch from 2% to 2.5%. So that is additional revenue in the budget that wasn't there the last time we met. In economic development, the Black Bear Express, which is funded out of the Downtown and Transit-Oriented TIF District, is increasing $2,050. We'd had some brief conversation about the fact that I had an estimate. Now I have a proposed assessment. And that increase will be netted out against an increase in use of TIF funds. On the community connector, I'm sorry, that was, the next one is the community connector. That has gone from our estimate of $67,500 to $73,050. So that increased the general fund budget $5,550. As we get closer to commitment time, we were able to refine our homestead reimbursement numbers. So we have picked up an additional projected $21,196 of revenue there. And in the proposed we are proposing an increase in EMS fees to match what the industry standard is at this point in time. Our billing company brought it to our attention that we are not billing what other entities are. And most of this goes to, it's not going to impact our Medicare, our federal reimbursements, but it will for private insurance and self-pays. So they estimated between $8,000 and $10,000 increase. I decided to go in the middle and have increased revenue by $9,000.
Go ahead.
Sophie, can we go back to the Black Bear?
Yep.
The increase assessment is $2,050, but that's offset by an increase from TIF revenue.
Yes,
So why wouldn't you
you
have,
should.
if you're looking at the impact on taxpayers, we shouldn't count that.
Yeah,
Or we should add,
I'll add
Uh,
in the
the
revenue
revenue.
on the other side,
so actually,
where,
we're to the good $2,000 more.
yep,
It's 76, whatever.
yep.
So that new figure should be 76,15132, I think.
And the,
Correct?
and the 2.5 is from the governor's budget, but isn't there a bill being discussed that,
We're gonna,
Oh.
yes, the answer is yes. We're gonna talk about that.
This is the worst case scenario.
So this is where kind of how we got from the budget that was initially printed
Right.
and given to you to today. So if you look at page 2, it goes through the projected, this should look pretty familiar to folks. It's the summary, budget summary and projected tax rate. I want to remind everyone, because people will forget, that we're dealing with the revenue budget and the expense budget. The other huge impact on the mill rate or the tax rate is what the value ends up being. And we don't set that until the end of July, the beginning of August. Mike has been working his way through building permits and dealing with trying to update our records to the April 1, 2019 value. What he's seeing are some gains and some losses. Where we are comfortable right now is to project flat. But just want to remind folks, just because I publish it doesn't make it so. It might change. So we are up $318,000 in operating expenses, down $319,000 in capital expenses, for a net change in the municipal expense of $757, or 0.01% decrease. Our revenues are down to $28,343, or 0.44% minus. Our net municipal commitment is up $27,585, or 0.58%. We know we're going to have a $15,000 increase from the county tax. We know, unless voters vote the school budget down, at this point, the school budget is flat, so we don't anticipate an increase there. So we need to collect $42,585 from taxpayers more this year than we did last year, which equates to a 9-cent increase in the mill rate. That's where we are today. Okay?
I hate to go back to it, but the only difference in what you just presented is that additional $2,000.
No, it's factored in here. If
Is
you,
it factored in as both an expense and a revenue?
it is, because I've tied my spreadsheet so that economic development expenses equal economic development revenue. So when I plugged it in as an expense, it automatically populated as a revenue here. So, we are at a point where I am out of kind of moves, if that makes any sense. I wanted to go quickly through some things, moving pieces. I did have a conversation with Councilor Osher. I think that there's something she'd like to talk about in the budget. And I've asked Rob Yerxa to join us tonight because we had a bid opening earlier this week for the North Main Avenue project. It was, it came in $110,000 over budget. This is this is a rescoped project that has been phased. So this is the first phase. Hey, Mr. Yerxa should join us. The original scope that was bid out went from College Ave to Peter.
Peter Street.
You want to take over?
Sure. So yes, the scope as bid was basically a full reconstruction from College Avenue to Peter Street, inclusive of the intersection. The bids came back. The low bid was $664,000, and we had roughly budgeted $550,000 for that portion of the work. The second phase, which we had anticipated would be done next summer, would take it from Peters Street, where we leave off, to Pond Street. Based on the bid results and working with our consultant engineer on this project, Oliver Associates, the funding that we have available right now, less expended, so what's been allocated, less what we spent so far in pre-construction effort, leaves about $600,179.10 in that project's funding, available funding. We would need about $709,355 based on what the bid results are and what our estimates for contract administration and inspection to finish out the scope of the project as bid, which leaves a deficit of $109,000. Basically have three options. The first option would be to truncate the project for this phase, so reduce the scope. In doing so, the most logical place to do that would be to, instead of going through the Peters Street intersection, you would go through the Pierce Street intersection, which is about halfway. If you chose to do that, the funding that's available now, plus about $5,000, would be enough. What we have available plus about $5,000 would be enough to do that much of the project. We would need to, and Hughes Brothers is the low bidder. They have indicated they are open to negotiating a reduced scope with us. So I think that process would be pretty painless if you chose to go that route. And then by doing so, the drawback to that is that in the next year, we have essentially that block left that still needs to be done. And based on what we're estimating right now, we'd be coming back to you asking for about another $170,000 in addition to the $350,000 that we've already programmed in the plan for next year for that project in order to complete phase two. The second option is to take a look at some of the projects that we have programmed in this current fiscal year. There are two. The most logical place to go in terms of reallocating funds from one project to this one to help fund it as bid would be the MDOT project that has been delayed, the culvert project. There's $250,000 in this current fiscal year's budget allocation.
But it's really only $155,000.
Less a $95,000 DEP grant that we got to match those funds. So there's about $155,000 there that could be reallocated to this project, funded as it was bid, complete it, and then still going to ask for a little bit more money to cover just to hedge our estimates based on what these bidding results have been. We talked about it when I was here last time. Statewide issue. This is not this wasn't a rogue bid. We got 3 bids there. The next highest bid was about $20,000 more on $660,000 of work. So it was a good bid. I'm not thinking it wasn't what we had hoped it would be, but it was, as far as when you look at it, was it a competitive bid? Yes, the answer is yes, it was.
Quick question, Rob.
Yep.
The culvert, when do they anticipate that happening?
Yeah, so for a number of reasons, that project has been delayed, primarily logistically. So there's a project that's going to rehabilitate the overpass on Kelly Road and I-95 that we've talked about. And there's also a major construction project on the bridge on Stillwater Avenue in Old Town. So the DOT working through there, each of those projects require detours and things like that. So to have that project and either one of those 2 projects going on at the same time would have been a little bit of a logistical nightmare. So, yeah. So looking at the priorities for the DOT, they chose to move that one out. As it turned out, that was sort of, I don't want to say good because the project needs to be done, but it's going to work out financially for the region as well, because as we talked about, Bax had to shuffle a bunch of projects around. So bottom line is that $155,000 that we have allocated this year, we won't need until fiscal year 22. So there's 2 or 3 years that we can allocate in installments in preparation for that project, not have such a big one-time hit on the capital plan moving forward.
So
We could work that in during next year's budget.
do you think it's realistic to say, though, that we won't need another 155,000 next year?
So if we keep this year's scope the way it is, the work that from Pierce to Pond is about 105,000 more than what we thought. So I'll be coming back to you next year for additional funds. We'll refine that once we get through this project, and we'll have a little bit more.
So would we
field
be looking
information
at
on that,
next
but-
year realigning the capital plan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Option 3, which is probably the least favorable, but it is on the table, would be for you to, you have 4 options. You can reject the bid, but I don't think that's really the direction we want to go. That's option Z. But a 3rd option would be for you to allocate more funds in this request and fund it in whole that way. That's probably at least a lower desirable option as well, but it is an option.
So I'm not surprised that the bids came in higher than we anticipated. I was listening to the Commissioner of Transportation on public radio 2 days ago, and the statewide bids came in 37% higher in the aggregate than they had anticipated. I mean, some bids were much more than 37% higher, and some bids were less, but they're having to do exactly the same thing and readjust and reallocate and not do as much as they had planned to do in the coming fiscal year. So I guess we're not surprised.
Yes, this is the market we're in this season. It will stabilize,
Yeah.
but it's not going to return to where it was based on all of the economic factors, labor costs, materials costs.
So from my perspective, this is a project that we've talked about for a couple of years, really. And we have adjusted the project by dividing it into two parts because we realized it was going to be more than we could handle financially in 1 year. So for me, the most logical option is, as you suggested, to reallocate those funds that we had already planned on using this year to come up with the amount of money that we need to do that project and just put off some of those other projects, which with the culvert was going to have to be put off anyway.
Right. On the face of the earth, in terms of what's going to happen out in the field this summer, that project wasn't going to happen anyway. So it's obviously having to restructure the improvement plan over the next 4 or 5 years in an area where we were already stressed for resources is going to be difficult, but what I would consider necessary.
I did drive down North Main Avenue this afternoon, and although you have done a good job of doing some patching there over the years, it really does need the reconstruction.
The pavement there it's about 30 years old.
Yeah.
So that's a good 10 past the normal life of a pavement.
And we have some other issues in that road
Yeah.
besides the pavement, which
Yeah.
we've talked about.
So the plan that I would have is, barring other feedback from council, would be to put an order on Monday's council agenda, reallocating funds from the culvert project to this one. The other order, just so you're aware, because we've talked a lot about Park Street. I think Rob's been doing some work with Park Street, and that we had $90,000 programmed for a municipal partnership initiative, collaborative grant between the town and the state. It's a 50-50 grant. The grant money is not available. So our thought is also to ask to be able to reclassify that money so he would have $45,000 to address some issues on Park Street.
Yeah, I'd do some type of limited scope. The other option is to wait for another fiscal year to roll around and reapply with the DOT. But the condition of the road from the end of the roundabout to a few lots previous Colburn Drive is in such disrepair right now. I'm concerned that we might not even be able to maintain it through the winter. So with 45,000, I can give it a kind of a Forest Avenue treatment where we go in and smooth it out and make it a manageable surface. It'll be a lot smoother for people to travel on, and we'll be able to plow it and maintain it a lot better. So that would be
Makes sense.
Rob, is it in disrepair because of the roundabout, or is it?
Because of the roundabout? Absolutely not. It's in disrepair because it hasn't been paved for. That's another one of those. Probably, I was involved with the project that did that back 25 years ago, maybe. So it's just a situation where the pavement's outlived its life. And no doubt that increased traffic loads in that corridor have helped speed that process up a little bit. But it's just due for some maintenance.
So, barring no
Yeah, I was
further-
just going to say that I appreciate the creative way that you're attacking this, and also it doesn't feel like we're just kicking the can down the road. It feels like we're using funds we have in the best way rather than having them sit for 2 or 3 years for a culvert that's not going to happen. So.
All right. Other than that, with Rob here, are there any other questions about the infrastructure budget that you want to talk about before I let him go home and have dinner?
Does this? I just have a question. How does this impact what we're doing? Does this impact our 2020 budget? Just what you're presenting tonight?
No, the only impact will be next year's request. Right now, we're showing a projected request of $350 in that line in North Main Avenue. That number will probably change when I revise it for next year's request, but not the current request.
It also it sounds like the money that you would not be using to repair the culvert, since that project has been pushed down into the future, plus some other money you talked about, would end up being more than the 100 and some difference in what you expected. In other words, it sounds like you actually have, by not doing the culvert project, it's maybe that's it alone. That was 155,000, and you said
Yeah.
that this project, this bid came in at 109
Yeah,
or 10
we're gonna-
different. So that means there's about $45,000 that you weren't going to use on the culvert, and you also won't be using on North Main. And so what would happen with that money?
So if it were up to me, I would allocate the whole thing to North Main Avenue, because you never know. We have contingency, but let's just do the project. And then if we had $45,000 left at the end, I would sweep it into the culvert, essentially a reserve for the culvert, so that we don't have to appropriate more money. That would be a start towards it.
And then you'll
Thank
see
you.
the balance to get to FY22 appear in a couple installments in future fiscal years.
That works?
Thanks for giving us options.
You're all set?
You want to talk about the other thing
What's the other thing?
you said
What was the other thing?
I would need to be prepared to talk about?
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's staff's need to just make sure we weren't going to change the budget. And then Counselor Osher and I had a conversation. I think there's something she wants to talk about as far as in the capital budget. Do you want me to do that? I will start. I'm happy to start for you. Counselor Osher came to see me to talk about her desire to find some energy efficiencies to reduce the town's draw on, or increase the town's use of renewable energy as opposed to fossil fuels.
And to reduce the amount of fossil fuels by making the buildings more energy efficient.
So what she had suggested was kind of a first step, and that was to get an energy evaluation done in each of our buildings and a report back that would talk about what the potential projects might be in the buildings and what the potential benefits of those projects, costs and benefits. So you would have a report in front of you that you could start thinking about as you were moving forward with facilities projects that might help us capture some low-hanging fruit, but also would be you'd be able to look at costs and benefits before you made decisions to go in a specific direction. She has a lot of information about this. I think what we agreed on as a reasonable budget for it was right around $20,000. And I would kind of make sure that council is all aware and maybe have a discussion about whether or not you want to add that to the capital facilities.
Is it Keith Anderson Library, Public Works?
So for $20,000, we're estimating that would get Public Works, Public Safety, Town Office, Keith Anderson, Birch Street School, WPCF, the pump stations, and perhaps the pool.
So I gave my experience, which is that when I've been doing this work in other buildings over a 10-year period, and in general, the savings that my clients get is about 35%. That doesn't mean they could pour more money in and get more, but they get about 35%, because some people say I just don't want to do that much, and they only get 10%, and other people do 50% worth, because you have to figure out how much you're willing to invest to get that savings. And that's for all different kinds of buildings. So I have some experience with some of the kinds of buildings that we have, and so I've just walked into them and I can see that there's low hanging fruit. And when I said that Sophie actually said, well, when we had an electrical problem at WPCF that we needed to fix, you need lights, so we needed them fixed, and they brought in a specialist whose specialty was lights. They then said, oh, if you also did this heat pump project, was it a heat pump?
No, that's the LED lights.
Oh, the LEDs.
Yep, that's in the budget this year.
So that when you bring in someone who has a fresh pair of eyes and a different expertise, they end up giving you other ways to save money that you hadn't thought of. And so that's
Lori, how did you come up with 20,000? Who was the energy? I mean, how did that appear? The 20.
Sophie actually went like that. The number of buildings, she counted on her fingers, and she said, "I bet that's about 20,000." And I was sort of like, Let me think about that.
So that's an energy evaluation. That's just for the energy evaluation.
Yeah, that was about $1,200 to $1,500 a piece.
Right. And so when she said that, I said, well, let me go through the way I do it. And I went and said, I actually just did the town building for Idaho. They hired me. I went over. It was kind of fun. Went on the ferry. Missed the end of our financial committee meeting, but it was a fun activity. And I didn't charge them very much. I charged them about $1,200. And that's what I charge.
Who would do the evaluation?
Sophie would contact people to find out who would do the
Do it
evaluation.
through an RF. I think you really want to do an RFQ process, Cheryl, just because oftentimes you can get free evaluation, but then you're using them for the work. So you really want to understand who you're bringing on board. Yeah.
So much like Rob said, we made an estimate and it turned out to be a different number. Sophie came up with a number, and I independently said, well, tell me how many buildings. And if I estimate it's about $1,200 a building, we end up still coming out with somewhere between 15 and 20,000. So that 20,000 is pulled out of the air from two different people's expertise. Her as someone who procures services of people making estimates, procures services of people who advise her how to do things that are outside of the expertise of her staff, right?
Yes.
You hire people to say, this is what we think you should do.
I do. I would just want to make sure people understand that was a number that it's a guesstimate.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. She made a
Done
guesstimate.
Research on this.
It sounded to me with the way I guesstimated in a different way. And I think that's a reasonable number in the ballpark. When you ask people to tell you how much they'll charge, then you will know when we get three estimates.
And
Yeah,
so, Sophie, if we just allocated 20,000, what would be the impact on the increase?
You mean if we just said we're going to put $20,000 more
Yeah.
in the budget? I have that. It's almost 5 cents on the mill rate.
Another 5 cents.
Yep.
So I had this conversation because I've been on council a year and a half, and I'm not quite sure, even though I've talked about this, and it still wasn't clear to me where I put this in the process of doing the budget. And so here we were this far down the line, and I went and said, maybe I missed where I was supposed to put this into the budget. So I'm mentioning it now, and I'm looking at the long view, is that in general, when you get advice from someone about how to make a building or a set of buildings more energy efficient, my experience across this industry is it's pretty easy for people to get 20% efficiency, which means that every single fossil fuel and electrical bill we have has the possibility of going down 20%. And when you look across, that's tens of thousands of dollars every year that we would be saving.
So for me, this is a little too vague for me to even consider it right now. I'm also dealing with a lot of citizens, I think even up on Forest Ave has been the thing about roads and things like that. So for me right now, not to say there wouldn't be something in the future, it's just way too vague for me right now. I can't commit to something when we don't even have an assessment that say 20,000 would. What happens? It comes back as 50. So personally, I'm going to bow out because I can't commit to something that's too vague like that.
And is there another place to find, do we have, like, is there another way to find it without increasing the mill rate again? I mean, is there any other funds?
Like another pot of money to go to?
Is there a rainbow? Is there
Well, there is none.
a rainbow that we can
Yeah.
just walk to?
So, you know that my job is not to tell you what to do. You tell me what to do. But I think that I've listened to council. I know I've listened to council over the last year. And I know that this council wants to be green. We want to be efficient. We want to improve our buildings and be good stewards of what we've been left with. I also know how much we have crunched this budget and that we are already pulling from fund balance more than what council had originally kind of given me guidance to want to pull. So I wonder if we could find a compromise where Councillor Osher can see that it's a priority for council to move this effort forward by putting this item on the capital budget for next year, which would give me the opportunity, if I know it's there and coming up, and it's something council wants to pursue, I can then reach out to some vendors that we have relationships with to just get ballpark budget ideas and be able to maybe work a little bit more with Councillor Osher to understand what the specific deliverables would be, because I think that will drive the price.
And no grant money?
So I think where you find the grant money, Cindy, is when you make the improvement, we can often get a rebate of sorts back from efficiency bank.
Yeah, I'm also still interested to see if there might be an evaluation grant at some point, especially for municipal buildings, I would think so.
So we have two buildings that would fall under the ability to get grant money if we did a partnership, because they don't as a municipality. So we could look into, those are kind of things we can look into over the year, because the Maine Community Foundation supports energy efficiency projects for in-town buildings. So that would be the senior center of a certain age, because it's tied to historic preservation, and they don't have to be listed. They just have to be old. We got some 2 old buildings. So there are ways. So I appreciate the fact that we're all interested in both keeping the budget so that we don't have to increase the mill rate, and yet at the same time looking for ways for us to move towards greening our facilities at the same time as we lower our costs. And that's what, and the energy efficiency has those two, double bonus. One is we say we're trying to move forward to lower carbon footprints. That's good for the environment and doing our part in that, but also there's the added benefit because it does reduce energy use, and that will lower our costs. So I thank you for letting me bring it to you. Once it becomes something that we encourage our staff to do and to look into, and because we have Sophie, she's well connected across the state, and she will be able to learn what there is to learn from the other towns that have gone this route, because there's all sorts of resources just in the connections to learn how to do this.
If I may, Lori, I want to thank you for bringing this up. I mean, you have a few times. I think it's important. There are a number of things that are really important with this. I think it's important to understand that this is something I think we all value up here. I agree with Terry. It is a little too vague for me to feel comfortable putting money in now. But also, I mean, I really like the plan of making this rolling, so it's starting to get some traction moving forward. Also, I do not want Councillor Osher to feel that every time you bring this up, it gets squashed, because that's not it. It's just a matter of fitting it into the way it works. And I think this is a solution where we can move forward with understanding, because it is something we all value. But I really appreciate your expertise in bringing this in with plans, the knowledge of grants and that sort of thing. So as far as the initial explanation of what you presented, Sophie, with perhaps next year, I kind of like where this is heading.
And is it possible to just do like just a pilot, just do like a building and see where the energy is going and see if where, you know, like when you do an evaluation, like where is it, you know, where are we losing? You know, where's the heat going or whatever, however that, I'm not sure what an
if
energy
it-
evaluation
Yeah,
is.
if it's at $1,200 or $1,500, if we
Mhm.
get down the road so we know what we want, we can absolutely do for one building, likely within our current budget. I have some professional services line. We might wait until next spring to make sure I have enough money in that line, but we often do things like that. So what I'm hearing or not hearing?
I was just
Oh,
going to add
Yeah.
briefly that I think that from the standpoint of getting folks on the side of this issue, in residents in the town on the side of this issue, it's some folks is going to be an easy sell because we have a lot of people in the community, like those of us on council, who are very interested in going and being green. But then there are also folks who are going to say, but there are other priorities. If we can then talk about savings in dollars and cents that we might see from making these changes to the buildings, I think that's a very good selling point so that you can get most everybody on the side of the issue. I think that just adding $20,000 into a budget right now and raising taxes is a way to discourage people from supporting this particular cause. And I think this cause is too important to not encourage people to buy into it. And so the best way that we can do that, I think, would be to treat it the same way that we're treating the Keith Anderson project, as you suggested, you know, putting the money in the next year's budget line to understand that it is a priority and we want to work towards it. And hopefully we'll be able to find the funds to do that.
And get some more definitive information and background information during this coming fiscal year. I think it's a good direction to go in.
all right. So based on what I've heard, when you see the capital plan on Monday night, it will include this project in for FY21.
Okay, so the story, I mean, part of the ways people become interested in something is when they have a story that's tangible. And so I work in percents all the time, so 20% may not make it for people, but I'll give you a tangible story, which is if you look at the facilities budget on page 3 under the senior citizen center, and I've chosen that because that's the age building that I am most comfortable with. I work with 100-plus-year-old buildings all the time of that size and smaller. And so that's within my expertise, much as when we talk about negotiating with unions, you had so many years of experience that something you brought some knowledge to that. So that building uses $4,500 a year for its natural gas bill and $3,000 for the electricity. And my guess is that electricity is not just the lights.
No, that electricity is a commercial kitchen that gets used very, very frequently as well.
So electric oven?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, gas oven.
It's a gas oven. So that electricity, I'm also thinking, must be used for something else, maybe space heating, maybe fans,
Perhaps,
air conditioners in the windows.
perhaps.
So that's pretty high for a building of that size, and air conditioners are very expensive. They use a lot of electricity, as do space heaters. So I've been in that building, and I'm sure that if the basement were insulated, the cost would be decreased incredibly for heating the building. Probably insulating the attic would make a big difference for making it cooler in the summer, in addition to lowering the heating costs. So if I'm going to give my conservative figure of fixing that building, just doing the basement $5,000 will cut the cost of just the natural gas by 20%. And I actually think it'll also impact the electricity. So that's 20%. That's going to be, or maybe we'll go a little bit more. So it's basically if we save $1,000 a year We've invested $5,000 and it would be a 4-year payback. Now that, I'm confident that that's what the numbers would be, but what a person who would come and do an energy analysis would actually measure the entire building, look at the actual energy use, look at the heating degree days, which means actually how cold it was during the winter heating months and how hot it is during the summer, look at the electrical and find out when that electric is spiking. So you find out whether it's air conditioning and or if space heating by how it changes with the temperature outside of how the electrical use, because there's not a lot of computers being used in there and there's not compressors and pumps, right? So basically that's, someone would come and do all the measurements to then say, it's going to cost you X to fix it. It's going to save you Y.
Yeah.
And therefore it's this many years. That's the only building I'm confident I can tell you that you insulate that basement and you'll get it back in 5 years. But the other buildings, I've worked in many of old churches like Keith Anderson Center, but not enough to give you a number right away.
Okay.
So,
I
so
think
that's an example. I just want to give you a story of saying it feels a little woo woo to say, oh, $20,000 and we'll give you a recipe for how to fix all your buildings. But I'm telling you, with that one building, I can tell you from right here, you don't even need an estimate. You can just, you don't need an energy audit, because I basically just did it, the thought experiment for you. You can get someone to give you an estimate to insulate the basement and you will save that money.
Great.
So there's my example.
I think I appreciate that. I think you've got your work order, and we could move on to
So
3.
before we leave this sheet, there were 2 items that we had. I know we want to talk about WPCF sewer use fees tonight, but just if we concentrate on the general fund first, I think it will be a little bit less confusing. So there were 2 outstanding questions that I left the previous departmental budget workshops with. One was a question about the request for money to rerun cable in the municipal and public safety buildings. I had sent council out the computer network assessment from Network Maine, which is an arm of the University of Maine, so it's not a vendor that has a stake in getting our business. And also the rationale that staff wrote up. I don't know if people need to have further discussion or if that was enough to justify or good rationale for that project, but I just wanted to check back in.
For me, seeing the rating of D was pretty telling. Yeah, and high risk for problems. So I questioned that item and wondered if it was something that could wait for a while. But having read that material, I feel much more comfortable with it personally.
Having been an academic, I definitely respond when someone says F, I know that's bad. When A, I know that's good.
Yeah.
However, on the fiscal side, what wasn't presented was when it says, oh, it's going to be, the reason gets a D, for example, is because it's going to be very difficult to find out where the problem is when it breaks. And so the cost of fixing it goes up because things aren't well labeled, for example. So I get that, because it's never any fun to try to fix things when you have to hunt them down. However, you didn't tell us how often it's broken and how much it's cost you, and whether the incidence of those breaks and costs have been increasing over the years, so that this is the year. Because maybe like the culverts down there are a problem, the culvert down there, but it's not the year this year, even though we know it's a problem. So what makes that $20,000 of this year cost?
So I will tell you that we have been limping along with this system. Earlier this week, I was in the middle of my budget, and all of a sudden I lost all of my internet access, which wouldn't be a big deal, except that everything that we have is backed up to the cloud, and we work on a cloud platform. And so I had no internet, I had no access to my files, and I had to wait while a very talented IT person went through took 45 minutes to get from there's a problem to, look, a switch got switched. Whereas if things were labeled and cleaned up so that you didn't have the rat's nest of beautiful, colorful wires, it would be a matter of going down, chasing it, saying, this is the problem, and oh, here's where I need to go. I can make that happen. I also would just say that to meet our disaster recovery protocol that the auditor pushed us for 3 or 4 years ago, to make the best use of our financial software so that we limit our number of licenses that we need, and that's all server-based, all are to save money, capital money on phones. We went to voice over IP. It was a cheaper way to have our communication system. And more and more we are, for our state efforts, we are dependent upon computer programs, cloud programs. So all of those things are absolutely critical to the functioning of this office, of town hall, and I would argue the fire station. Our pagers won't work, and at times, they've gone down twice in the last 2 months, when the tone goes off and they want to hit a callback, we have problems, and it has to do with the way the cables were left in there, and trying to find the solution when something gets unplugged or unhooked is really, really difficult. So we have all this dependence on our technology, yet the framework that we're running it through is subpar.
Okay, so the costs are not externalized. You don't have a bill that said somebody came and cost to fix it. The costs are the downtime and us not providing the services that that our town expects us to provide because the lines are down.
I think
Okay,
there's some of both.
And mandated
Yeah.
state.
okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
I think there's some of both, Lori, just to be clear, that we spent a bunch of time having GWI here to try to solve problems for us that we were convinced were GWIs. By the time we got it solved, they had gone from gratis calls to charging us for the calls, and we discovered that it was a switch that was up in the attic of the fire station that nobody would have thought was there.
When Councilor Perry brought this up, I was thinking, oh, well, along the same lines. Well, I mean, it's a mess to have a bunch of wires, and maybe sometimes it'll cause us to lose staff time. But I'd really like to know, are we losing a lot of staff time? Could we push it off? But after reading the report, I think that the biggest issue isn't a dollars and cents of how much it's cost us in staff time, or it might next year. I think the biggest issue that's quite clear from this assessment is that it is at a grave risk of failure, a high risk of failure, and we can't afford to take that risk. For me, it's no longer, I mean, it would probably have massive fiscal impact if it were to fail, but the fact that it is a high risk for failure has more ripple impact than dollars and cents of staff time. So for me, it's not a question that it should be addressed.
So I'm
everybody
going
in
to leave
agreement?
it in. Okay. So the other item that got some discussion and questions was in the fire department repair and maintenance line. There was $35,000 budgeted in FY19. That request went to $50,000, and what you saw in your March financials was that there was still $16,000 or $17,000 remaining in the account. So, a couple of things. First, months have gone by, annual testing has happened. We've had annual maintenance done to the account, to the trucks. As of today, we have $2,300 left in that line. The reason that the chief is asking for additional funds, we have two forces at play. One is that the trucks are getting older, and as they age, the types of things that we're having to repair are getting bigger. It's not just the small stuff, number one. Number two, for many, many years, we have been blessed with an incredible traveling mechanic, Bruce Caswell, who would show up at all hours with his truck and his tools and fix the fire trucks for us. He has retired. So the closest place that we saw was that we had used, other than Bruce, was in Casco to work on these types of pumps and equipment. So we tried to find someone locally. We've actually been working with group of fire departments, BZ, Glenburn, Old Town, I think maybe Milford and Orono are all kind of working together. Ended up issuing an RFP to say who is out there in the universe in this region who would be able to work on our trucks. Got one response, a company called Autotronics. They look like they'll do a fine job, but the difference is a $65 an hour labor rate and a $99 an hour labor rate. So those two things together, given the types of repairs we see in the fire department, I would stand by the chief's recommendation on that. As much as I'd love to find $15,000 for you.
And maybe this isn't the appropriate time, but did all of those towns get together and negotiate with these people about, if they get a whole group of towns, maybe they could reduce their hourly rate?
I met with Autotronics, and $99 is probably a little bit less than that is not probably what they offer everybody else. The thing that we're kind of working towards, Cindy, is working with this company. There's still some certification that they need to get, and they need to know that they have the business to go get the certification. But the next step that we would have is likely to look at all of those towns getting together and agreeing to share a mechanic, wherever that mechanic might live in terms of an employee to do the work. When you go to the dealership, you're not paying $99 an hour in labor. So these are highly specialized pieces of equipment. So I think we got a really good, unfortunately, I think we got a really good rate at $99 an hour. So those are the two that I can remember.
All right. Anyone have any problem keeping the fire maintenance? Okay.
I think another issue might be tariffs and things that are happening, across the country that we might have to pay attention to as well. So I'm good.
All right. Does anybody else have any other items that we have not discussed that Sophie has got to look at in the budget? What's that?
I have one additional that we didn't talk about on the other day, which is that I just went today. I paid on my own because there was no more money in any kind of training budget. I went to the Build Maine conference. It was fabulous. It was co-sponsored by 15 municipalities. When a municipality sponsors it for $500, they can have everyone that's their elected officials, anyone who works for the town, and anyone on their planning board can go for that $500. And the registration is about $80 per person per day. So that's this. I went in the vans with the city of Bangor. They had 11 people going, and I was the 12th person. It was very nice. They gave me a ride down there. The Build Maine conference talks specifically about how municipalities, local governments, developers, the DOT, community organizations can focus on how to improve their towns. The speakers today talked about pedestrian safety, which we've talked about, and the cost of crossing guards and the safety and issues of drive-in businesses on our main road and how many cars pass through here. So there was a lot of discussion about main roads and how they're managed, for safety, reduced death was good thing. They had a developer talk about developing in small towns. An architect talked about historic buildings, and there was someone who talked about walkability. So both two things were about pedestrians. It was great. It just reminded me that one of the things we discussed at the finance committee was training, and certainly in this budget we saw line items for training for specific staff members that work for us, because it's very important for them to get continuing education to either do the job that they're already doing or to expand their role or be able to take on other responsibilities. So I'm a big fan of training, and I'm really pleased that the budget already reflects training, specific training for employees for our town. And to me, this seemed like a good opportunity. Again, it's another addition. It could be that it's already covered in some discretionary budget that Sophie's put in for the counselors or for the employees, but I was quite impressed to see these 15 towns sending vans full of people from their town, so they all had the same discussion. They'd all been the same, basically, day-long class on how to think about towns' resilience and safety and development for better economics.
So I guess, Lori, we have $1,000. We've increased our training and travel budget by $250. And I think that would be just a discussion for council on prioritizing how they want the training and travel to be used. So I don't think we should, personally, I don't want to add more than the $250 that's already there.
I wasn't asking to add it. It was a point of information that these are the kind of things I think our job. I think our job as counselors is to vision in the long term. In addition to our job of by ordinance, we have to vote on expenditures that are beyond a certain amount. Our town manager asks us for guidance, so there's day-to-day workings, month-to-month workings, but I also see our role as a long-term view, and that one of the best ways to be able to do that is to have a shared experience education opportunity together, which is one of the reasons I was excited about us last year all going to MMA training together. And so I wasn't asking for any more money. It's just that it's a way for me to vocalize to the town that's watching us and to all of us that this is one of what I think that would be a good investment. And because it's right in our state, it's about our state. It's called Build Maine.
So we discussed this at length when we went over the town council budget, which I believe was day one of I don't recall if you were at that meeting or not, Lori, but the video is available if you want to. We did have a lengthy discussion about training and what kinds of training that we would be interested in. And certainly we can continue talking about, mostly we were talking about how to start formalizing the process that we use to determine how to spend that $1,000 that we're budgeting for council training. So that could be something we discuss at another time. But if you want to catch up on the conversation that we had.
Yeah, I was at that meeting, and the $1,000 that you're talking about, I'm introducing something that was not just for the council. This is a $500 that spans council and our employees, the 70 people who work for us, and the people on our planning board. And so I'm not asking to be added to this particular budget, but just as the discussion we just had about safety is, if I talk about it now to the public and to all of you, then we have it in our mind as a future goal, because it's not just for the council, although I would love to see the council attend Build Maine. It speaks to that discussion that I was here for, and some of the comments from the town council, which it took me, I guess, this much time to be able to articulate a response to the comments. The comments were, some of them were, well, we don't want to really, I can't even remember exactly what they were, but they were more like, well, if you need to go, then you should go. If there's something you need to learn, and I guess I wasn't able to articulate then that I do believe one of our roles is to have a vision and have that vision as 7 of us, as opposed to, for example, when I keep coming and talking energy efficiency, it's not, you guys care about energy efficiency, but it's not your vision. Part of the way to get a shared vision, have a shared experience. And so that's why I bring it up.
Okay, thank you.
So if the next place I'm ready to go is into revenue, looking at what is on the horizon for revenue, because I think there's some question. I just don't want to move beyond where you guys are. Okay. On page 3, I do apologize for the formatting, but of this sheet, but I'm hoping that it looks perfect on my screen, but when I print it out, it just doesn't. So when we last met, there was some discussion about what's happening in Augusta around revenue sharing. So I thought I'd just take a couple of minutes and make sure we're all on the same page, and then move forward with what I think I know. The first thing I would just make sure everybody understands is that for many, many years, the towns in the state of Maine had a relationship in state law with the state of Maine to receive 5% of all sales and income tax that comes to the state. That has been eroded over time. This is part of the big tax shift from other types of revenue in the state to putting the burden on the property taxpayer. We could spend hours talking about revenue sharing, but I think that just gives you kind of the history. So last year, which is FY19, the year we're in, we received 2% of all sales and income tax that came in. And for us, that equated to $894,815. This year, there was a major push to try to get revenue sharing restored to 5%. The governor's budget came out and it shows 2%, 2.5%, so a 0.5% increase over last year. I refuse to look at it that way. I look at it that we're getting 2.5% less than we're supposed to, just so you know. So that 2.5% is $1,274,520. So it is an increase over last year of around 300,000. $379,705. In Augusta, there are 2 efforts underway. One happened early last week where the House passed a bill that restored revenue sharing to 5% and retroactive to January 1, 2019. That bill had an emergency preamble, so it required 2/3 majority. It fell 5 votes short. My read and in talking with folks who are connected in Augusta, I pretty much killed the full restoration. But I still ran numbers because I wanted you guys to be able to speak about what that impact is to the town of Orono. So late last week, the Joint Standing Committee on Appropriations voted out an amendment unanimously to amend the governor's proposed budget. That amendment increases the budget from 2.5% to 3% of revenue of all sales and income tax. And it also shifts, adds to the homestead exemption. So the homestead exemption would go from $20,000 to $25,000. And most of the time we cringe when we talk about homestead increases because in the past the legislature has said we will increase the homestead exemption and municipalities will bear the burden of the loss of revenue. This one, they are also increasing the reimbursement rate from 62.5% to 70%, which in effect is covering that new 5,000 at 100%. So it is a shift that holds us harmless. So I talked via email with Kate Dufour, who is the MMA lobbyist. So she is walking the halls and has a good sense of the pulse. I think the 3% really has a good shot. That amendment has a good shot of passage.
Sophie, is that also retroactive?
No, that would start July 1. But what that would do is increase our revenue by $239,315. So what we projected in the budget right now would be increased if that amendment passes, almost $240,000. So you asked, what does that mean? What does that mean? So I ran this two different ways. One was as a straight reduction in the mill rate. However, as I sit with council, I think that one of the objectives that we have not yet been able to meet in the budget year this year is to reduce our draw on unassigned fund balance as part of the budgeting process. So I ran this two ways. As allocating all of the revenue and not changing anything else in the budget, the mill rate could go down 44 cents. So it would go to 26.56. If you also decreased our draw on fund balance, we could decrease our draw to 204,000. It's at 400,000 right now, and we could hold the mill rate at 27. So to put that into perspective, just so you might be able to do some shaming of your state officials, when I do the same type of calculation for full revenue sharing, if we just took all the revenue and passed it through for, no, take that back. If we took all of the revenue, stopped our draw on fund balance completely, not there yet. We could pass along a savings, so we would go from $400,000 to $0 from fund balance on an annual basis, and we would pass along $1.66 savings on the mill rate. Then, just because you've heard me cry about the state of our infrastructure, if we dropped our draw on fund balance, had 5% of revenue sharing, and added $300,000 to the capital infrastructure budget for roads, we could still pass along $1 off the mill rate. So when you start talking to your folks in Augusta, you can show them that there really is some savings to be had. So I know council likes to look at the impact on taxpayers so I stayed in the vein of single family homes. I can do more if you would like, but I've gone through to look at each of the options kind of that are out there. And so we have, if you look at the long sheet you have, going down in the first column, so as you go across, the first row is what the assessed FY19 tax was, for example, for a house of $120,000 with a homestead exemption, then without the homestead exemption, just to give you a sense of what the base tax is. Then the next column is with the current budget and based on the current the governor's current proposal of 2.5% and no change to homestead, this is what the tax would look like for each of those scenarios. So do you guys see how that's working out? And then what that projected impact is. So we raised the mill rate. We're going to go to it would be $9 increase in taxes for a property assessed at $120,000 with a homestead exemption, and $11 if that same property didn't have a homestead exemption. Then the next set of numbers are based on the current draft budget and the Appropriations Committee amendment. And so this one is passing everything along that we possibly could for tax relief. Then, yep. This is the 3% and the homestead going to 25,000. The next one, the next block is the current budget based on the 3% and the homestead increase from the Appropriations Committee, but reducing our draw on fund balance down to $204,000. So from 400 to 204, and that holds the mill rate. And then the other ones are just there for, it's 5%, and I really don't think that's, it's a nice dream.
So would you like some feedback?
Yeah.
I appreciate how you laid this out. If we went to 3%, I would not feel right if we didn't pass some savings on to taxpayers. I recognize the concern you have for undesignated fund balance. I might even be willing to consider some compromise that maybe reduce the draw on fund balance by 75 or 100,000 and pass the balance on to taxpayers. But I would be opposed to not passing some of that additional revenue on to taxpayers and reduced tax rate. So it would have to be below 27 for me to be supportive of it.
What was the
personally.
number that we were talking about last time that you used to say will never draw more than X from unreserved?
350, I think, was the number that was historically here when I got here.
My thoughts are that after these years I've been on council and hammering repeatedly at this issue, any chance that we get, I also would want to pass as much of this on to the taxpayers as possible. I think that they, quite frankly, it's long overdue and they deserve it. I worry about the use of unrestricted funds. I would be interested in talking about going closer to the old limit instead of the current limit. But yes, I'd like to pass on as much as possible.
And Sophie, I have a question too. How is the revenue dispersed? How does the state disperse the revenue to the municipalities?
So the state gets 3.4, they're projecting that in the coming fiscal year, they're going to get $3.4 billion. That was with a B.
I guess what I'm asking is it one lump sum?
Oh, no.
Do they send it? Okay,
No,
so
we get it on the 20th of each month. We get whatever our pro rata share is.
Okay. All right. So it's not just there. It
Well,
comes in.
And to understand too that it's not a guarantee. This is not guaranteed. There have been times in the past where the legislature has essentially said, we're going to move X number of dollars into revenue sharing and you will get X amount, period. They at least went back to the old method of when things are going well, we're getting percentages. So when more comes in than they expect, we're getting a little bit more, which happened last year. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but it happened last year. So there is a risk that you're not going to get it. However, there's also a risk that you'll get more. I just want to make it clear to council that you don't need to do anything for me. My job is to show you options and for you guys to decide. And as the person who tried to represent you down in Augusta, I do think that passing along savings to the taxpayer is an important piece to the credibility of how we're going to use revenue sharing.
Well, I found it very useful that you used roughly half. If we cut that undesignated fund use roughly in half, this is what the number would be, because that does give us a range that we can kind of work back towards.
You know, for years, those folks who have been opposed to increasing revenue sharing in Augusta have used the argument that, well, municipalities, we give them more revenue sharing, they're just going to spend more money. They're not going to reduce taxes. So, I just feel so strongly that we have to do some reductions of taxes when we get more revenue sharing. And I'm glad that with the 2.5% for revenue sharing, that is pretty certain, bottom line, that we're at least going to be able to maintain or almost maintain the tax rate. I mean, I'd like to find another $42,000, so we didn't increase it at all. But if we get 3%, I mean, we've got to show, we've got to be honest about it and reduce taxes.
I absolutely agree with that, especially with the proposal where fiscal year 21, it's proposed, right, instead of 3, it's being proposed 3.75, correct?
Yep.
I'd be more inclined to increase the cut for taxes with that, but then maybe that year work with the fund balance a little bit more. But right now, I would love to send a strong message that we hear. When people are talking about the tax rates, I mean, we do hear that. And I think, as Tom said, as Megan, as everyone has said, I'm very, very much in support of doing as much as we can.
Well, and I mean, I agree with everyone about the tax rate. And also, we started at fund balance at about 250, and every year we took an extra 50. So I think lowering it by 50 for a while wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing. So
I think the thing that the town has built absolute credibility with is asking for the things that we need or that we feel are really, really important to the services we provide, being transparent about that, and being able to have a discussion, which I think we've done very well this year. So I think it will only lend to our credibility, not only in Augusta, but here, if we can do some of that. Would you like so on Monday night, I'm going to present your budget. I want to make sure that I'm presenting what you want. I would be happy to include a section that says this is happening in Augusta and this is our plan of what we would do if that happens. And we are fine with making any adjustments to the FY 20 budget, especially if it is on the revenue side, right up until commitment. So it's not something we have to decide.
So what is your takeaway of what our plan is if you present, this is our plan if we go to 3% versus the 2.5% that's currently in the budget?
What I kind of heard was some coalescing around dropping our draw on fund balance by $50,000, and at least present that, see what kind of feedback you get. That is kind of what I heard.
What I'd personally like to see is I'd like to see the council hasn't made a final decision on that, and that one of the options that we've seriously discussed is dropping the use of unassigned fund balance by the $50,000 and the remainder going into tax reduction. And the other option is all of it going into tax reduction.
Okay.
That's what I'd like to see personally.
Yeah, and see the numbers and how much of a difference it is with the 50,000 in and with the 50,000 out.
Okay.
Dropping it by 50,000 would just keep the mill rate the same?
No, it would still reduce the mill rate.
Or will reduce?
50,000 is just about 10 cents on the mill rate. So, just, I will endeavor to do that. And are you all right with showing a 9 cent increase if it stays at 2.5%?
I mean, I agree. I wish that we could keep it completely impact neutral, but still, when we're talking $42,000, I think it makes a strong statement that both the RSU and the town have endeavored to not raise taxes to the degree that they're able in presenting their budgets this year.
Okay.
I think this is the magical year where the school has not increased their request from the town, and that doesn't happen very often. So,
Don't
and
believe
and
that.
understandably, I'm not being critical. So, whatever we can do to
And
help the
Sophie,
tax rate, I'm for.
that 42,000, that would include the 15,000 increase in the county.
Yeah, we're actually only up 27,585.
Yeah.
So the 15,000 is the assessment from the county.
Could you go over the payment in lieu of taxes we get from the university and how that has changed from one year to the next in the last few years?
It has not changed at
Mm.
all in the last 6 years.
In the last 6 years?
And
and-
we get $655,431 a year.
How many times do you think you say that number?
Well-
Obviously.
You know it by heart.
So it has not changed.
I appreciate that that's the most that any university town gets, and that we have the flagship university, and that's helpful to our budget, that they do give us payment in lieu of taxes. But I'm wondering how, as a council, we can work towards negotiating something greater with the school. If there's precedent for that in other states or other places where towns get payment in lieu of taxes from entities that don't pay taxes. I know some constituents have sent me things about other cities like Boston, how the universities that are in Boston are providing services in kind in addition to cash in their payment of lieu of taxes. So how is that addressed? And is that something that we could look towards, as I talked about with energy efficiency, making an initiative over the year where we try to figure out how to maybe get that to be raised?
So if
So-
I could just add 2
Yeah.
points on that. One, I think that we would have to look at the university as also being funded by the state. So they've had some serious hits. So we should really look at the state to fund the university more to then get us money. That's my personal opinion. But 2, I think it now would be maybe talk about the sewer rates so that we can show where that increase would have hit the university, because it's 734.
Absolutely. And I would also just say that, like us, the university is on a fixed budget. They get their, they pass a budget and that's what they have. And they actually start their process much earlier than we do, even though it's a July 1 year. My understanding is that their budget has been in the can for quite a while. So I don't know that if council can do whatever it wants and have whatever discussions it wants, but I don't think it would help us for this year.
I think, just real quick, I don't think Lori's necessarily talking about asking them for more money specifically, but starting a conversation where there may be other ways they can contribute additionally to the community to add some kind of connection to.
Thank you. Yes. Well, so because things are not synchronous, because there's asynchronous, I imagine that their budget is already, and I used to work there, so I imagine their budget's already in the can. But to introduce this as if, if you do not have a goal, then you're not going to reach the goal.
Sure.
So I'm speaking this as a goal of how we, as an entity that's, yes, as a citizen of Maine, I'd like to tell my legislator that I want them to fund the university better so the university would have more money. But as a town councilor, we do have a relationship with them outside
Sure.
of me just being a citizen of Maine. And so this is the forum in which I'd want to introduce that would be something I'd like to try to figure out
In
how
the
to,
future, we
to
can
do
do that.
address this in the
Yes.
future. Yes.
Yes, great.
Can I just bring your attention to two other pieces of information in your packet? One is the reconciliation of fund balance sheet. This should be folks should have seen this last year. It's the same where I kind of give you the framework of what we have in unassigned fund balance. And the last page is just a little cheat sheet for you of what 1 cent, what an amount of money on the mill rate, how that impacts the budget. So for example, with the homestead value, with the homestead exemption where it is and our current value, 5 cents on the mill rate generates $22,698. So this is just a cheat sheet for you guys to have. That is my packet in full. So I know you guys wanted that we just had a few people here on the night that we discussed the sewer fees. And I wanted to just take a minute to make sure that we were in agreement.
Did you get to have a conversation with the university about?
Oh, I tried to schedule one. We're meeting on Monday at 10 a.m.
To discuss a 25-cent increase?
I was going to discuss, at that point, they had already been made aware of a 25-cent increase. We did that quite a while ago. So I was going to talk with them also about the fact council was looking at 40 cents. But the soonest that they could fit me in was on Monday. Mhm.
Sure. So I guess I'm just wondering why 40 cents, 25 seems pretty significant to me.
So 25 cents will started in July, will will fund the current budget and give us $14,000 more into reserves. 40 cents starting in January will fund the budget and give us $1,300 extra into reserves. 1,300.
So the real issue is we need to have an increase in the sewer rate. We understand that. Do we make it a year-long increase or do we make it a 6-month increase?
You mean it's a one-time increase? Or is it going to go up and stay up after this?
It will stay,
it
it'll
will
stay at
stay
that
up.
rate.
So you're saying whether we do it incrementally or just all at once?
Whether we do it
We have
next
been doing
month
it.
or we have
incrementally.
been doing it in January of each year.
So if we did it in January.
So the other piece is that to start on July 1 with a 25-cent increase will increase the university's contribution by $31,000. When we start on January, it will increase it by $27,000. So there isn't a ton, that is not a ton of difference there. It is the general taxpayer would end up paying almost double if we, not quite. The average taxpayer, family of 4, would pay $22 starting in July, $17.60 if we started the 40 cents in January. It gives us the opportunity to notify our residents before we increase, as opposed to the billing just going out increased.
Excuse me, and historically, we have changed our rates January 1st.
So when I first got here, we did it in July, the one rate increase that we had. But what we've seen is the discussion happens in June. So I've always recommended that we do it in January because that gives us an opportunity to let people know that the rates are increasing and for us to get a notice out in a bill before they start.
Yep.
That was kind of my thought.
And a 25-cent increase in January will not balance the budget, is that what you're saying?
25-cent increase in January, you would have to cut $22,000, $23,000 out of the budget.
I think as part of the discussion for the public, we ought to say that one of the things that we looked at when we first discussed this was how our rate compared to other rates in the area. And while our tax rate does not compare well to other communities in the area, our sewer rate compares very favorably, and we're one of the lowest in the area.
We are. Even with the increase, we would be among the lowest.
For me, I think the argument of giving the community reasonable notice of the increase makes sense. If we increase it to July 1, that's just a few weeks away.
Yeah.
So I'd support your recommendation that we go with
So if we
January
do
1.
a 40-cent, would that kind of catch us up so we wouldn't necessarily have to do such a big jump the following January?
I think so. I really, I'm a little bit concerned as we're watching process, and part of what's driving the budget this year is the incredible increase in electricity, because we used to run one side of the plant at a time, and now we're having to run both sides, and that's doubling the pumps and the aeration that we're using. So there's a lot of electricity. I don't know, and Joe is not sure right now. That's a process change we made for this year when the university was in session. We might not have to do that again next year. We wanted to make sure we had adequate funds to be able to cover what we did, the process that we're using. But if we end up that this is an anomaly and there's just something happening in the system, then we might be in a position not to have to ask for a rate increase. However, we might also, if electricity stays where it is, we're probably going to be for a small one, but not to this degree. I think we've made the jump.
When we first started looking at this, I was leaning more towards the immediate raise, only because we could get away with raising it less. And I thought that seemed like maybe a good idea. But I mean, looking at it more and thinking about it more, it is, I mean, I agree with Tom. It's a pretty sizable hit to the university particularly, and there's not a lot of time really to give adequate notice to the public. But it also, I mean, if there were then a much more substantial increase the next time we had to raise, I just don't think, I think it's probably better to raise it to, for the 40 cents now, knowing or planning for January, than to kind of have that large leap the next time we have to raise it.
And I just want to remind folks that you cannot do simple straight math in terms of July to December and December to January, because our flow is substantially different in those quarters.
I think about January and how everything goes up in January because it's winter time. And so we have, people's heating bills go up, people's electric bills go up. Is January such a great time to introduce a 40-cent increase? I just wonder, because it's an expensive time of year anyway.
So those on the minimum usage, which is where we see a lot of, there's been concern expressed for, elderly folks or retired folks. And so if there are two people in a home, you'd expect that they're likely going to be at the minimum, a minimum user. That's $5.40 a quarter. If you're using 2,200 cubic feet, which is an average family of 4, then you're looking at $8. I'm sorry, I will round up, $10 a quarter for that one. So just to kind of put that in perspective, $10 more for 3 months.
Put it in those perspectives, that's not unreasonable.
So from my perspective, there isn't a right answer. It just,
Right.
I need to know what you want me to tell people we're going to do.
Council?
Yes, is there anyone who is opposed to 40 cents in January?
My recommendation would be wait till January and do the 40 cents.
I feel the same.
I can go along with it. But I would really, we've been doing a rate increase every year, and I would really like to see us slow down. I appreciate that we're the lowest, but we've been going pretty far on it. So, anyone else have anything?
So I have 2 quick things if we're done with this. So you're fairly content with the budget? Okay. I'm not ever going to ask you if you're happy with it. I have 2 quick things. Number one, I just want to remind folks that the process is that you've done all of this work. I'm going to stand up and try to speak eloquently about many, many pages in a book to let the citizens on Monday night, let the citizens know what the impact of the budget would be and what the scope of services would be. This is not saying that this is the absolute budget that is going to be passed. If we said that, then we would not be utilizing the process. The process is to let residents come and speak on Monday night, and we actually give it 2 weeks so that you have a week if there are changes that you want to make to the budget. So just remember, this is a process, and that you've had your process. My staff has had its process. You've had your process, and now it's time to let the public weigh in and talk about what they want. And then we'll keep the 17th open, because if there is considerable feedback at the council meeting, what you would need to let me know is you guys want to meet again and talk about the budget. And we would schedule a meeting on the 17th for that purpose. So that was my second. And my third announcement is one of those, oh my word, there was all this work and it was not a great day until Dave Mylan showed up in my office this afternoon to let me know that we received a call from the Office of Community and Economic Development to let us, to make us aware that we in fact were funded for $50,000 for our CDBG application, which is what we requested. So it was a highly competitive process this year. Dave did an amazing job. He does.
Do you want to quickly unpack
work.
that acronym for our folks who haven't been sitting through?
CDBG,
I just saw some maybe mildly confused faces.
Community Development Block Grant. So this was the business assistance grant to assist buyer manufacturing with facade improvements that hopefully will make us all very happy to see that improvement to the village.
I'd like to suggest that instead of making the meeting on the 17th, we'll meet if we get feedback. I think we ought to just meet on the 17th,
Okay.
even if it's a brief meeting, just to confirm our budget.
I think that's a great idea.
Do your sources in Augusta give you any idea of when the numbers might be coming out? So like would the 17th be an appropriate time to maybe know if it's going to be 3%?
I don't know that we will know. However, my suggestion, we had a taxpayer send an email. I don't know if everybody got it. I know I got it. And I think Cindy, you got it. Talking about frustration at times with public entities that are not really transparent about what they're going to do with money. So my thought would be that on the 17th, part of that discussion would be finalizing what you would do if the 3% came in so that you can codify it in the council order when you adopt the budget on the 24th. I thought that was a really good piece of advice because we might know what we want to do and all have agreement, but if it's very, very clear, then our taxpayers will know. I listen to residents every once in a while. That's all I have, folks.
I would just like to thank our frequent flyers here. You guys never miss a budget meeting, and it's a small turnout, but the quality is immense. So thank you for showing up. Immense quality, is that something?
It's Monday. Yeah, I love Tuesday.